thinking of these policies as behavioral economics can sometimes be misleading. I think the easiest way to think of them is that if you were a service sector company, your entire goal would be to understand the psychology of the person buying your product. If you're a government, you're in the service sector, you're in the providing service. That's what a government does. And so as a result, your single goal should be understanding the psychology of your consumer. And I think sometimes governments forget that fact, but governments ultimately are a service provider to people. So I almost think of a lot of behavioral science now being applied to policy as simply getting governments much more attuned to the psychology of their consumer. So in a way, I think it's actually a movement towards empowering the consumer, empowering the voter, and getting politicians to think about that element of it. So bandwidth is the mental capacity we have to think through things, to think clearly, to exercise self-control. And that core capacity to actually exert conscious control and think about things, that capacity is limited. So some examples we have, this is not from our research, but others have shown, is that when you've got something on your mind, when there's something tugging you away, so an example that we often give is, say you've got a project that's due tomorrow, and that in the evening you need to go and see your son playing in a football game. You go to watch the football game. Now, you should be there cheering for your son, but a part of your mind is back on the project that's due tomorrow. And that fact that you can't control where your mind is, that's the essence of bandwidth, that you have a limited amount, but you don't get to control where it goes. And other things, in this case, this project with a deadline, can determine where this bandwidth goes. This distance between what we intend to do and what we end up doing is so enormous. Like, what time did you wake up this morning? What time did you intend to wake up? I mean, it happens in all of life. We fight with our significant others. You intend to say, okay, next time the situation gets heated, I'm going to calm down. What do you end up doing? You end up fighting more. And so we have, it's a very basic nature of human life that we have a lot of intentions and only some of them are realized. And I think that if public policy understood that some of the most pressing problems we face are actually in that domain, increasingly, eating healthy. Many people intend to eat healthier than they end up doing. Fitness, many people want to work out, but it shows up in every aspect of life. You're a small business, you may intend to formalize, but there's a lot of paperwork and it feels like an enormous pain, so you don't end up doing it. So many things in life, when we see someone doing something, it's not that they intended to, it's that they intended to do something else, but they ended up doing this. Here's a poor person, they're short on money. Here's a rich dieter, they're rich, but they are short on calories. Here's a very busy CEO who's short on time. You would have thought these people have nothing to do with each other. So perhaps the most surprising finding we have is actually the psychology that all these people share is the same. Because the psychology of scarcity, whatever you're short on, seems to be the exact same. So that ability, so that's what I mean by scarcity creates its own logic, which is actually already kind of surprising because you wouldn't have expected these things to be similar. You would have thought, oh, poverty is about the culture of poverty, time management is something different, but all these things about how we manage when we have very little, those seem to be related. And perhaps the most surprising thing is that what we do, the psychology of scarcity, has this huge benefit, but it turns out that that benefit is undercut by in turn creating behaviors that reinforce scarcity. So it's the reason why busy people stay busy. They are more productive under deadline, but they undertake these behaviors that keep them busy. Or the poor stay poor, or why dieters never succeed. And so that logic that scarcity is both something that it stretches across these behaviors, but also generates its own trap, is at the essence of what we do. time scarcity is often the big issue that entrepreneurs deal with. That sort of, they have a very limited amount of time, and managing that and juggling that creates its own problems. I will say, when you talk about the growing middle class, there's something I wish I could understand better, which is the psychology of abundance. You have a project that's due 2 weeks from now. You have the psychology of abundance. You end up not working on it, you end up whatever. Then 2 days before it's due, the psychology of scarcity kicks in. So I almost feel like when the middle class is growing, we are at a dangerous point. It's the dangerous point you're at when you have too much time to do a project. A lot of it is wasted, and then you cram at the last minute. And so abundance, I think, creates problems like that, like not enough savings, because you have this feeling that there's just so much money. And so I feel like one way to understand what might be happening here possibly is the psychology of abundance. A really basic one is that when we think about human motivation, there's a lot that goes into what makes employees work. Behavioral science suggests a bunch of things. One thing that is really an important part of motivation is the monetary reward. So traditional economics would have said incentives matter. Well, behavioral economics finds incentives matter. I mean, we did a project on data entry workers, and we showed data entry workers have these self-control problems. They want to work hard, but they don't end up working hard. But the other finding in that paper was you make the incentive pay more, you give more incentives, you get more work. I think economics, and I think many things fit this. It's not that economics is wrong, it's incomplete. Incentives are the perfect example. It's an incomplete statement to say only incentives matter, but it'd be equally wrong to say incentives don't matter. They very much matter.